Good morning, all. I want to thank Dr. Strawn for giving me this privilege to speak to you, my Grand Bahamian public especially, on a topic that I surprisingly remain very, very enthusiastic about: storm surge and hurricanes. As a preview to what we're going to talk about, why me? I actually was asked that question already this morning. Why me, a retired meteorologist? What is storm surge? Storm surge factors, we're going to go into some factors. Storm surge central. Why do I believe that Grand Bahama is the storm surge capital, not of the Bahamas, but of this region? Cuba. Some folks in here may be familiar with Cuba. And we're going to do a little review and some lessons learned. So why me? In an attempt to answer that question, because I don't really know why Dr. Strawn asked me, but in an attempt to answer that question, I'm going to submit something to you. I'm going to submit some names: Floyd, Francis, Jean, Wilma, Matthew, and Dorian. Any of you, and all of you, can you remember where you were during the passage of these storms? Okay. How many of you are meteorologists who got wet from every one of these storms? That's why it's me. I'm a meteorologist, was a meteorologist, former meteorologist, former forecaster with the Freeport Weather Service, former forecaster with the Bahamas Department of Meteorology, and meteorologist at the Freeport Weather Service. I actually got wet with every one of these storms. And every one of these storms were major storms, right? And every one of these storms impacted Grand Bahama significantly. So I was doing research before I was doing this presentation in preparation for this presentation, and I felt a little cheated. Went to the NOAA site, National Hurricane Center, and they have this nice graphic where you can actually pull up every single storm that passed through this region, from 1851 all the way to today. When I was a meteorologist, I didn't have this. So these guys, Mr. Dwayne Neil Leon, the director of meteorology, they're very fortunate. So I started to play around with it, and I could look at tropical cyclones, for instance, that pass within 100 miles of Grand Bahama, every single one of them. Then I, kind of kept going. Now, all of the hurricanes that would have passed through Grand Bahama were within 100 miles of Grand Bahama. Played with some more tropical cyclones. Again, from 1990 to last year. And again, playing around with it, just the hurricanes that passed within 100 miles of Grand Bahama from 1990 to last year. And then I said, okay, let's look at the major hurricanes that passed through or near to Grand Bahama from 1990 to 2019, over the last 20 years. Enough of my fascination with that. I am here to talk about storm surge. And what is storm surge? By the way, does anybody recognize that photo? That is the Grand Bahama International Airport. Whoever thought about that? Actually, that is the back of the old Freeport Weather Service. Standing at the back on the upstairs, looking at the airport, the airstrip. In the very middle of that photo is the fire rescue station. Can you see it? This is 1999, Hurricane Floyd. I believe that our lesson was taught to us by Floyd, not Dorian, not Francis, not Jean, and any other storms. Before Floyd, 50 years before Floyd, we hadn't experienced a major storm in Grand Bahama. Floyd came and it taught us a lesson. I'm not today convinced that we learned all the lessons from Floyd. So, what is storm surge? First of all, I have to talk about what it is not, because I walk around the community and folks use some terminologies They're like, what? No, that's not. It's not a tsunami. Tsunamis are typically related to volcanic eruptions, explosions at the bottom of the ocean, and earthquakes and stuff like that. Not a tsunami. It's not a tidal wave either. Tidal waves are typically related to gravitational interactions between the sun, moon, and earth, not sea swells. Storms far away and wind pushing and the fetch and all that, not that. So then what is storm surge? Now, if you ask the director of meteorology, or even we nearly one of those guys, those guys are really intelligent. I'm just a simple guy. They're going to give you some technical definitions and all that. No. For me and for my general public, I simply say it is the push of water by the wind. Sustained wind pushing water onshore. That's all it is. Okay? So, there are some things that we have to be cognizant of with storm surge, though. I want you to read these notes. The storm's low pressure is what causes the rise in the sea level, and it's the wind that push the water forward. Rain and its associated runoff add to the water levels. The tide interacting with the wind will also add to your water levels. But most importantly, I really want you to bear in mind the very last statement. It is easier for strong winds to push shallow water than it is for strong winds to push deep water. Remember that. So AccuWeather has this nice graphic that kind of shows a demonstration of how storm surge acts or how it looks with a storm track and a powerful wind pushing the water towards the coast. The National Hurricane Center has another nice graphic that kind of shows us mean sea level, the average sea level, and then, high tide. 2 feet above high tide, for example, in here, and then a surge to define something called storm tide. Now, during Dorian, I heard this term called king tide. I don't know if you guys heard that. Not a meteorological term. No. But I think that term originated somewhere in Australia or something like that. But anyway, it's a storm tide. Okay, so there are many factors that determine the severity of your surge. Okay? I'm going to go through some of them, but there are 3 factors that are going to help me convince you of why I believe that here is storm surge capital. Total kinetic energy, this is just speaking when it's pushing, right? It says more intense storm cause higher surges. The size of the storm, large hurricanes cause surge over larger areas. Makes sense? The speed of the storm. Now, this one is interesting. Faster forward speed causes higher surge, but if you're moving very slow, it gives the wind more time to push more water. So whether it's moving fast or slow, it's not good for you, right? The astronomical tide, high tide coinciding with the storm passage adds to the level. We know that. And finally, the moon phase. New moon and full moon coinciding with the time the storm is passing through, will increase your surge levels. Those factors are common no matter where you are. In the Caribbean, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, doesn't matter where you are. Those are common. The factors for Grand Bahama that we have to be cognizant of are the angle of approach, our geography, and something called bathymetry. So let's go into these. Now, this is back to my fascination. All right, so I just centered it on Grand Bahama, right in the middle of Grand Bahama, to get all the storms, all the tropical cyclones that would have passed through. And this is what I came up with. Now, if you were to attempt to draw a center line on the passage, or the approach then, of the storm, of the storms, you perhaps, for me, I came up with two lines. The first one, about there, and the second one, about there. So, essentially, it just tells us that most storms approach Grand Bahama from either the south or the east. Okay? But the majority, or the vast majority of them, approach Grand Bahama from an easterly component. Now, when the meteorologists come up here, I ask them, what does that mean? The wind flow around a low pressure system, which a hurricane is they would tell you it is counterclockwise and inward towards the low. I simply say, if the storm is coming from the east, the wind is coming from the north. Just remember that. That's all you have to remember. It's counterclockwise, inward, trouble basin. Okay? Angle of approach. So, storms approaching from the east bring sustained northerly winds. We already established most storms that approach Grand Bahama come from the east in our history. What about our geography? By the way, this is one of my favorite photos. I don't know if you guys play around with Google Earth or Google Maps. Man, this is one of my favorite photos. Why? Because the Bahamas seems to be a flashlight. Like it's the light of the world. You know, it's just bright. Brighter than everywhere else. Right? Mm-hmm. There you go. Someone is preempting me. Shallow waters, right? So if you move a little closer, it reveals a whole lot to us. I'm not the only one fascinated with the photo. The American astronaut Scott Kelly has expressed his love for the incredible sight that is the Bahamas from space, going so far as to label the Bahamas as the most beautiful place on Earth. Absolutely. We'll take that. I will not disagree with him. But what do you see, though? What do you see on the islands? You see shallow water. You see that aquamarine hue. Beautiful shallow water. What else do you see? We're talking geography here. So geographically speaking, almost all of our islands are northwest to southeast. There are a few exceptions. Inagua, Crooked Island, New Providence, and Grand Bahama. Inagua's out of the picture. Inagua doesn't have shallow water. The banks. Crooked Island is buffered by Acklands, even though it has banks to the north. New Providence has no bank to the north. Its banks are to the south. Andros has banks almost all the way around it. Almost. Fortunately for Andros, most of the population live on the east shore. Grand Bahama, broadside. The entire broadside of Grand Bahama is banks. 70 miles of banks from east to west, 60 miles deep. Okay? North. So the statement, Grand Bahama lies east to west with banks along its entire north shore. What about, why am I keep talking about these banks? Well, that speaks to your bathymetry, right? Bathymetry speaks to your continental shelf. how deep or how shallow the water is as it approaches the shore. The statement, a wide and gently sloping continental shelf to the north of Grand Bahama will inevitably induce storm surge. It's called the Little Bahama Bank. That's our trouble. Interestingly enough, I had a Canadian visitor come down after Dorian, and I kind of was trying to explain to him the same concept. And he made a comment. It may not be crazy. He said, "You guys are doing a lot of dredging in the harbor. Why don't you just dredge the Little Bahama Bank?" I mean, it sounds like crazy, right? If this is true, then dredge the whole bank, Wild and crazy. This is my rendition of Dorian. The red is his passage, and the bullseye is where he stopped. I used to live in North Bahama, 35 miles from the center. The folks closer to the center of the storm experienced 20 feet surge, and so on and so forth. I was 35 miles away. I got 6 feet 2 in my apartment. I think that it would be nice if we could get the meteorologists to go around the island from east to west and do somewhat like a contour map and do a survey of all of the places that got impacted with storm surge. And do a map to say, okay, if you get a storm at 185 north wind, because on our north shores is a Little Bahama Bank. Matthew brought us south and southwestwards. Floyd, 78 miles away, gave us northwards. Cuba! Everybody in here who works at Grand Bahama Power Company knows what this is. Anybody else knows? Very, very simple concept. CUBA just stands for knowledge, understand, believe, and act. The knowledge you get, the information, the data that you get, right? How much of it do you comprehend, do you understand? And then how much of it do you believe? You're getting a lot of information right here in this conference, right? How will you act based on the data and information that you get? So I'm going to try to apply the CUBA model to hurricane passage. Okay? Bear with me for a second. So I would say that the knowledge part of things, where the data and the information comes from, is National Hurricane Center and NOAA. They're the folks who send the reconnaissance aircraft to the storm and collect all this pressure and wind data and all that stuff. And they send that data to all of the meteorological areas around the region. Okay? They also put together hurricane advisories, public advisories, wind probabilities, so on and so forth. So you'll see a report like that. You probably won't see it, but certainly the Department of Meteorology will. Okay? The understand part of it would be the Department of Meteorology. Those are the folks who would take that data now and apply it to a specific area. Let's say the Bahamas, or Jamaica, or Puerto Rico, or Barbados, or Trinidad, or wherever. So they take the data and they apply that data. What does this mean to my location? So the Bahamas Department of Meteorology have a task, a very, very daunting task, because we are an archipelagic nation, very, very daunting task of figuring out all of the different nuances and idiosyncrasies of all of the islands in the Bahamas, and then trying to apply that data to each township, each city. It's hard. So they come up with these tropical cyclone advisories and marine advisories and hurricane forecasts, area forecasts, so on and so forth. Okay? They are trying to get the general public to believe. Who's the general public? It's you and me. It's you and me. It's the government. I lump them all in there. The government, The Port Authority, the business owners, NEMA, and all that stuff. They're trying to get us to believe what it is that they're saying based on the data that they've collected. By the way, I chose this advisory because I want to read this statement just out of fun. It says, storm surge, a life-threatening storm surge will raise, this was Dorian, by the way, will raise water levels by as much as 18 to 23 feet. Now, be truthful. Before Dorian, how many people would have believed that? You did? Go? Okay, all right. So I worked in meteorology for 24 years. I'd seen that statement a number of times. I'm not going to lie to you. I found that hard to fathom. 18 to 23 feet. And I know now, Mr. Bazin, you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody in Grand Bahama who would not believe that. They believe it now. And then, who's acting on all the data and information? Everybody. Everybody should act. General public, decide to stay or leave. Right? Right. Determine parking. I put that in there because I had to determine where I was going to park. I was living in North Bahama. I finally decided I'm going to park at Pelican Bay. Some of my friends said, "You're crazy, that's next to the ocean." I said, "No, that's on the South Shore." Bahamas government issues storm updates, reassess, and designate shelters. And we already know from our history that some of our shelters had to be reassessed and then reassessed and redesignated. And the Port Authority, and all this stuff could be any one of these folks, right? Port Authority revising building codes and mapping out low-lying area, like I suggested earlier. And finally, the business owners, of course, deciding on proper shutters and insurance and the lot. And then NEMA, interesting, revising rescue equipment and procedure. I would not go any further with that stuff. So just a few thoughts of the review. The majority, I remember I said, I believe that this is the storm surge capital of the region, right? The majority of storms approach from the east, we know that. In the northern hemisphere, east approaching storms always bring a north wind. Grand Bahama's North Shore is lined with a 70-mile long shallow bank up to 60 miles wide. A sustained strong north wind will easily pile up water on Grand Bahama's North Shores. Most of Grand Bahama, like every other island in the Bahamas, is low-lying. And there's nothing to the north of Grand Bahama to buffer or break the wind, like some folks say. Lessons learned. You don't need to have a hurricane force wind to produce storm surge in Grand Bahama. Isn't that what Floyd taught us? Similarly, hurricane does not have to pass over the island to produce a significant surge. A storm can pass within 5 miles of Freeport and not produce significant surge. Angle of approach. Storm surge is prevalent on Grand Bahama because of the Little Bahama Bank, combined with the fact that most storms approach from the east. I had to put this in. Don't say it will never happen again, and certainly don't act like it. I have a cousin who said after Floyd, it'll never happen again. And then after Francis and June, he said, wow, I can't believe this. This is not out of the ordinary. It'll never happen again. Believe it or not, after Dorian, he said it again. I'm like, wow. All right, so after having all the information, understanding the data, and believing the forecasts, make wise decisions on how you're going to act. Saying it won't happen again is just hoping, right? This comes from the word. Wisdom gives life to them that have it. And similarly to Dr. I call you Dr. Hogg. Professor Hogg. We had a mantra in meteorology when I was at Freeport Weather Service. Similarly to what you say, but we said it this way: pray for none, prepare for one. Thank you.